Hello, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Very warm welcome to the kickoff event of the 2022 UN Behavioral Science Week. My name is Ayaka Suzuki. I'm the Director of Strategic Planning and Monitoring Unit of the Secretary General's Office. I'm very pleased to moderate this high-level segment. As some of you may recall, diehard B-side fans, UN B-side Week 2021 last year, the Secretary General launched his guidance notes on behavioral science, which signaled very strong support for this innovative approach. And UN Behavioral Science Group has since worked on the implementation guide of this guidance note, which Mary will discuss later in this event. And so just a quick background, coordinated by the UN Behavioral Science Group, the 2022 B-side Week will bring together colleagues from 18 UN entities who are collaborating to host more than 20 webinars between today and the 10th. Sessions will cover topics including climate, health, peace and security, empowering women and girls, embedding behavioral science into organizations. UN B-side Week events are free of charge and open to all, and have all in the past attracted attendance and attention of UN colleagues as well as representatives from governments and academia. So please tune into as many events as possible. This high-level opening of the UN Behavioral Science Week will bring together thought leaders from the UN and the field of behavioral science to discuss the concept of behavioral science. An opportunity presents the work of the UN, how the UN can systematically leverage it. So without any further ado, I am very pleased to hand over to Under Secretary General Volker Turk, who is currently Under Secretary General for Policy and was the mastermind and spearheaded the process that led to the publication of our common agenda, the seminal report that was issued to the General Assembly. So with any further ado, Volker, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ayaka, and thanks to all of you. And really, I'm very, very happy and pleased to be able to open this Behavioral Science Week. This is fantastic. It fits very well with what Ayaka has mentioned, and that's the Secretary General's vision for a United Nations, as we call it, 2.0, which is what the Secretary General has put into our Common Agenda report, which really means how do we as an organization beyond Secretariat, with all agencies, funds and programs, become an organization of the 21st century in terms of not just moving the boxes and the institutional side of things, but actually in terms of our own culture, behavior, and mindset. And I think that's really what UN 2.0 is about. It's to try to think, what are the advantages, the comparative advantages, the values on which we are based of the United Nations, and how can we deliver better to people who we have to serve around the world, and what type of methods do we use for that purpose. And I'm therefore extremely pleased that all of you who have in one way or another either been even experts on behavioral science or worked on behavioral science issues, that we actually come together and learn from each other and actually walk the talk when it comes to behavioral science and really move ahead and move the needle on this important topic for the organization. I'd like to share with you maybe 2-3 points that I think are important also as you move ahead. I don't know whether you have experienced it, but I certainly have. When there is a lot of doom and gloom messages that we ourselves from the UN system have to provide to the world about, the impact of the triple planetary crisis. We just had Stockholm +50, the World Environmental Day yesterday. And we know that, unfortunately, the political leadership around the world is not geared up to massive change that is required in order to protect people and the planet. And when you talk to, sometimes when you drive in a taxi and you talk to people, you sense an incredible, you get this impression of frustration and almost depression. People sort of switch off. They say, oh, well, nothing will change, temperatures will rise, we will have to deal and we will have to adapt. And of course, it frustrates us within the UN because we know that we're sort of running against the wall if we don't change course fundamentally. And so what do we do about affecting this type of mindset? And it's a mindset that, you know, is a sense, it's not a mindset that goes back to not wanting to change, but it goes to a mindset of not seeing the potential to change. So behavioral science comes into play very importantly. How do we activate, how do we motivate people to fight for a better world? And how do we get them to overcome this sense of frustration and depression that they may have because of the, you know, potential dystopian future we may face if we don't change course? So we really need to think very hard through behavioral science how to motivate, mobilize, inspire, and capture the imagination of people for change. And obviously it starts within our system, within the UN system, but it has to have this contagious effect to the world outside. And we are ourselves extremely important change agents. And so, you know, we don't give up. We have to keep fighting for a better world and going into the details of what this actually means in terms of transition, in terms of implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, in terms of also making sure that this orientation towards the future, which is contained in the Common Agenda, is becoming reality in today's world. So behavioral science is certainly a very important tool for this, but it's also linked to strategic foresight. It's linked to the data that we sit on and how we communicate them. It's linked to a stronger results orientation, and it's linked to innovation. And that leads me to the second point, the innovation part of it. I'm a lawyer by profession, and I have found it extremely interesting to learn about behavioral science, because as a lawyer, especially as a lawyer who also looks at systems and if you even the philosophy of law, we always want to identify how we can influence the behavior of others so that either they are norm compliant or that we ensure a basic understanding of, you know, the rules of the road, if you like, on a number of issues, on a wide range of issues, actually. I thought that behavioral science really helps to innovate legal thinking and standard setting in today's world. We know that in the past, it took years to negotiate conventions, treaties, agreements, which if we look today, we just cannot afford to lose time on this. So we really need to work much harder on innovating the standard setting process, but also ensuring compliance with it. And again, behavioral science is an incredibly important tool for this. And a tool that builds the trust that we need, which goes back to the social contract idea that the Secretary General formulated in our Common Agenda report, how to rebuild the social contract, how to remend it, if you like. And behavioral science comes in as a very important tool. And the third point is about the UN itself. We undertook a study last year. We asked Jordan Ryan, a former very well-liked and well-known colleague from UNDP, but also as an RC and looks back at a varied career within the United Nations, to look at what integration means between the humanitarian side, development side, the peace and security side, obviously, and the human right, underpinned by the human rights dimension. And he undertook a behavioral science study of the type of traits and characteristics that we see, not just in leadership, but also within different levels of the organization, of what it means to take a stronger collaborative and a team approach. And it's a really important piece of the puzzle, because again, it applies to us in the UN, but it also applies to governments, because frankly, or even within societies when it comes to national and social cohesion. And I thought it was good to show how that study has shown to the broader membership, but also in particular at the principles levels of the UN, what behavioral science can do to essentially effect change. And it's great that this comes together. We know as a result that a lot of governments around, both in the global north and the global south, have actually established behavioral science teams and initiatives to promote its application. And we have certainly seen that in the context of vaccination issues, those governments that have used behavioral science methodology have done much better when it comes to ensuring access, but also provision and the acceptance of vaccines. And I should also mention, and we have Professor Abhijit Banerjee with us, that the Nobel Prizes have recognized behavioral science. I think Professor Abhijit was recognized by the Nobel Committee for his experimental approach to alleviating poverty. And again, it's very important how behavioral science has played a role in this. I think last week we engaged with another Nobel Prize winner in this field, Professor Richard Thaler. And they again, it shows, it's also recognized by the highest, if you like, echelons of science and recognition of the importance of behavioral science. And so we're very, very happy that you have all joined us for this week, and that we, try through this work and through going through the various motions, learning from each other how behavioral science can influence not just UN work, but also, more importantly, the outside world and the many challenges that we face, because that's one of the very few avenues that gives us hope that we can actually overcome what would otherwise be inertia or frustration in facing and addressing the many challenges that we face in today's world. So very, very happy that this week takes place and that you all participate, and we all count on all of ourselves to continue this very important endeavor and learn from each other and really move ahead. So again, thank you very much, and I wish you all the very best for this week.
Great, thank you so much, Volker, for those inspiring words and really kicking us off very well for this week. So now turning to our keynote speaker, Professor Abhijit Banerjee, who has already been introduced by Volker. He's a professor of economics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, co-founder of the Abdul Latif Jameel Poverty Action Lab, which is a global research center working to reduce poverty by ensuring that policies informed by scientific evidence. And as already mentioned, winner of the 2019 Nobel Prize, along with Professor Esther Duflo and Professor Michael Kramer. So over to you, Professor Banerjee. Thank you so much for joining us.
I can't video.
I'm sorry? Are you having technical issues?
May well be.
You seem to be, you seem to have two devices.
Yes.
Maybe just join with one device because that may be producing a feedback.
Yeah, I think that, it works better now?
Better. Okay, we don't see you though.
I can't start the video.
Now it's working.
It gets shut off by the host.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me. I have very few minutes because I have another hard deadline in 5 minutes now, for 4. So I'm going to just jump to the point. In a sense, what is behavior science? Behavior science is sort of social sciences broadly interpreted that takes very seriously the view that the way people behave needs to be taken seriously in policy design. I think that's the idea that in some ways sounds entirely obvious and is in some ways is very radical, because I think most disciplinary approaches to these kinds of policy making start from models of how people behave as either as parts of groups or as rational, quote unquote, rational human beings, but these are very specific ways of looking at people. And often they forget key pieces of how people actually behave. So in some ways, I think what's critical is to emphasize here that this doesn't mean being cynical about people. Quite the reverse. It's not. In many ways, my discipline of economics has a very, maybe one might call it, cynical view of human beings. They want money. They are very forward-looking. They think of the future, but they think of all of those things in terms of money. And I think what we've learned over the last now 25 years of work in behavior, what we call behavioral economics, is that that's a very limiting description of people's behavior, and one that actually makes us make bad policies. That people care as much about dignity as they care about, for example, getting the extra $5. They don't want to be infantilized. They don't want to be pitied. They don't want to be treated, humiliated. And I think that I think the key reason I emphasize those words is that I think there's a tendency to associate, at least in policy space, behavioral science with nudge. And I think nudges are great. Nudges are very important. We do, as the previous speaker emphasized, I think taking nudges seriously gets immunization rates up. There's all kinds of work, including some of our work, that shows that. But I think that's just the tip of the iceberg. In some ways, there's so much more to once you start thinking about why people do certain things, I think you learn things that you wouldn't have thought of. One of the facts that sort of always strikes me is how low the take-up of social programs are. In the US, but in developing countries, for very poor programs for the poorest of the poor in Indonesia, we studied them and there was a 60% take-up. The rest of the people didn't take it. And thinking about why they don't take it up, why they give up these wonderful opportunities that are supposed to be for them. And I think is important. And part of that is clearly people, they worry about stigma, partly they worry about their own dignity, partly they just don't understand programs. And all of those, the fact that bureaucratic speak is often off-putting or confusing or just, entirely closing doors on people. I think those are important ways in which we need to rethink, and that goes well beyond the thoughts that I think important thoughts and nudge units and nudge thinking brings together. So I guess I think this is I think the previous speaker mentioned climate change. And I mean, climate change is classic area where in some ways, I think if people were to think just selfishly for themselves, I think the entire angst that we see for right now wouldn't be there. But in the end, most of these people will, especially in the rich countries of the world, will not be too affected by it. I think it's precisely the fact that they are moral beings, they're sentient beings who share the misery of the world that makes them so much of today's young so concerned. So I feel we should take these ideas seriously, precisely to bring back the human being in the way we make policies. So with that, I'm going to take your leave. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for those succinct but very powerful message. And I really appreciate your taking time from your busy schedule. So I understand that your time is limited. So, okay. So then let me introduce the panel. I hope all the panel members are present. So in the alphabetical order, I am very pleased to introduce Undersecretary General for Global Communications, Melissa Fleming, who was previously UNHCR Head of Global Communications and spokesperson for the High Commissioner, but also author and host of the award-winning podcast, Awake at Night. Rodney Ghali, who is the Assistant Secretary to the Cabinet Privy Council Office of the Government of Canada, who has been leading the exploration and execution of new and innovative policy and programmatic approaches focused on improving impact and accountability and value for Canadians. Claudia Mojica, a longtime friend of mine since we worked together in Haiti in mid-2000s, who is currently the United Nations Resident Coordinator for Argentina, previously Resident Representative with UNDP in Chile, and Deputy Director for the Americas Division in the Department of Political Affairs, among many other things. So the first question is to Melissa. So we just heard from Professor Banerjee and Volker about possible ways behavioral science can help advance the work of the UN. And I know that you've been very active, many things, but in particular in combating misinformation, disinformation. Could you share with us some of the practical applications of behavioral science that the Department of Global Communication has already piloted and an impact that it may have had? So over to you, Melissa.
Thank you, Ayaka. This is a subject, if I didn't embrace behavioral science in our communication strategy, then we would really be amiss because our entire global communication strategy is way beyond just communicating facts, because behavioral science tells us that people, when they're confronted with facts, with data, with the statistics of human suffering, how do they react? They feel numb. So it's a condition called psychic numbing that leads to actually inaction. So what do we want as the United Nations when we communicate the facts about our dangerously changing climate, about the wars that are driving millions of people from their homes and causing terrible suffering? We want them to do something, right? We want them to feel. So our entire communication strategy is designed around what I call the 3 W's of cause communications, and behavioral science is the kind of backbone. The first is the what. The UN owns the data. The UN owns the science. We need to be able to communicate that. That's absolutely key. But the second W is why care. And that why care is where the behavioral science comes in. And that is informed by the understanding that people will not feel unless you speak to them in a way that will move them. And this you cannot do just by making a decision at UN headquarters in New York and saying the entire world is going to feel something if I communicate this story this way. So it really needs to be, there has to be a lot more. That's why our communication strategy is very audience focused. We need not just for a target audience to receive the information, but also to understand it, to believe it, to feel it, and to ultimately act upon it. So the third W is what now, and that is the what now part. So I very briefly, because I know that we went to get to the other panelists, but we did a global experiment with COVID-19. For me, it was very clear also against the backdrop of witnessing how people were just numb to the data of climate change. When the COVID-19 pandemic hit, it was very clear to me that we were faced not just with a global public health crisis, but a communications crisis and challenge as well. How are we going to convince the world public to adhere to very uncomfortable new measures to protect not just themselves, but society? Measures that they didn't want to do, and where they had in many parts of the world their own leaders contradicting the advice of the World Health Organization. So we launched a very behavioral science-based strategy called Verified. And Verified had 3 pillars that were really key to doing this. First of all, we really took that messaging that is science communications, that is often the mistake of most science communications, and that is that it's just in a PDF document with lots of numbers, and very inaccessible to the way people receive information in this modern communication age. We took that guidance and that communication and broke it down into like compelling content that was going to travel in the same spaces where people were receiving mis and disinformation around COVID-19. The mis and disinformation being very emotive, very compelling, very black and white, no science nuance, and really, you know, providing the kind of advice that was accessible in people's feeds. The second was a campaign that we launched because we found that what people were doing, because the disinformation and the misinformation was so human and emotive and compelling and kind of fed into people's belief groups, people's tribes, that it was going to be really important that people understood that how mis and disinformation travels. And so we launched an initiative based on behavioral science called Pause, Take Care Before You Share. And this Pledge to Pause campaign basically encourages the public to halt for a moment before you share content online, to look at what you're seeing and really study it and say, what is the source of this, and become your kind of own investigator before sharing shocking and emotive material. And we partnered with MIT and who did a study and found that our pause content significantly reduced people's propensity to share fake headlines and was effective at introducing a behavioral nudge that reduces the sharing of information. Interestingly, Twitter, and I don't know if they were motivated by our pause campaign, but they very importantly introduced a similar mechanism. So many of you perhaps are on Twitter and you've noticed that if you've tried to share an article that you haven't read, you'll get a little pop-up button that says, are you sure you want to share that before reading it? This goes a long way to stop the spread of the mis and disinformation that was leading people to behaviors that were extending the pandemics and killing people, quite frankly. And finally, and this is a really important learning and also something that we're going to be expanding and continuing. We did a mass experiment with what we call trusted messengers. We knew that sometimes the UN is not necessarily the institution that people trust. And when you want people to change their behavior, it's very clear and it's studied everywhere. Who are they going to look up to? Not some big institution that they're not really so sure of, but people in their community who they trust. And so we elevated a group of around the world scientists who were working in vaccine labs and who were were quite charismatic, but had very few followers. And we trained them on TikTok. And we got TikTok actually to help us to verify their accounts. And they started taking people inside their labs, explaining how vaccines worked, answering people's questions, and they went viral. They started getting asked onto national TV and became this kind of source of somebody in their neighborhood speaking their language, but with scientific authority for information. We've expanded it to 100 healthcare workers around the world, have created thousands of videos and reached, I don't know how many people. So I could go on with all of but these are the three kind of areas, and we've had enormous success with Verified. We believe we've moved the needle. We believe that we've possibly even saved lives. We've certainly changed minds, and we've made science more accessible. We think we can do this in other fields like climate change. And so I'm really excited about it. And thank you very much, Ayaka. That's all from me.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing these initiatives. It is really exciting and inspiring and saving lives. So important. Thank you. So over to Claudia now. Well, I know that Argentina, and there are also many initiatives in which areas do you see most opportunities for applying behavioral science to advance the work of the UN, but also, I mean, at the country level itself? So over to you. Thank you.
Good morning, colleagues. Good morning. Thank you, Ayaka. And first of all, thank you for the invitation. I am truly honored to be part of this opening session that my colleagues have been following with a lot of interest from last year. So here in Argentina, you also have that part of that group that you mentioned at the beginning, following the behavioral sciences with a lot of interest. In line with the question that you have asked, I would like to start by noting how my own experience working with national counterparts here in Argentina, but generally in Latin America, has highlighted the importance of behavioral science to address the different sustainable development challenges and ultimately to advance the implementation of the 2030 agenda. As the Secretary General mentioned in his guidance note, we must embrace approaches to our operations that are innovative and that connect us with the realities of the citizens on the ground. And behavioral sciences are a cornerstone of those approaches, as the guidance note correctly states, to keep moving forward also with the reform of the UN system to make us more coherent as a group here at the country level. And particularly here in Argentina, we have a very concrete example of the political and also the operational importance of this field for our member states. Here, President Alberto Fernandez established in his own office a unit for behavioral science and public policies. This unit operates under the National Economic and Social Council, and particularly under the areas that are working on community of care and food safety. I must say that this Social and Economic Council that was established here by the executive looks after some of the issues that were already mentioned in this session, such as the participation, citizen participation, to reach consensus and to build dialogue around strategic priorities for development, what they call inclusive development through dialogue. In a session that has been scheduled for this week, for Friday, you will hear more about this work, and you will hear directly from our Argentinian counterparts who will explain more in detail how the Council is coordinating with different areas of government to improve public policies, and also working in the analysis, evaluation, and the scope of government programs. So for now here, what I would like to underline is that for our own UN country team, for the different entities that are working here in Argentina, the work with the Council, it is a priority for the reasons that I already mentioned. And we also work with the Council as a working relation that helps us strengthening the government's capacity to use the behavioral sciences to achieve the SDGs. And it is in this context that I think I speak on behalf of the entire UN country team. We are really proud to support what President Fernandez has characterized as a genuine state policy to help people make better decisions, again, in line with what we have already heard, and encouraging people to make these better decisions for themselves, but also for their country. We are really honored to be part of what's become a rich multi-sectoral network of experts, civil society, academia, private sector. And this work is also supported by other international organizations, such as the Inter-American Development Bank, that is directly involved in this endeavor. So in concrete terms, what we see here in Argentina is that we have several opportunities for partnership with the UN system through behavioral science, along the mandates and the activities of the different UN entities in the country. And as examples, I would like to mention nutrition issues. For example, we have a recent law that was adopted on food labeling, where several of my colleagues were working to promote, and now we need to move to the implementation. To education issues, for example, in the reintegration of children that fell out of the schooling system during the pandemic. We also can apply this approach in environmental issues, as somebody already mentioned. And for example, here we look at the promotion of waste separation and also awareness campaigns on the importance of recycling. And in particular, I would like to refer to one concrete line of work that is going on here in Argentina. And I'm talking about the work that ILO is carrying out on the application of behavioral science insights to promote decent work. Again, you will hear more about this in a dedicated session that I think it's taking place tomorrow. So today, what I would like to highlight is the importance of applying behavioral science to promote issues as important as the formalization of domestic workers, to encourage a more equal distribution of care work, and to combat violence and harassment in domestic work. All these examples that I have mentioned are without a doubt priorities within the Agenda 2030. They deserve our attention, and they deserve our best efforts to develop system-wide solutions within the UN, and also, as important, to match the commitment and the ambition that is being demonstrated by our own member states, as exemplified here in Argentina. Once again, Ayaka, thank you very much for this invitation, and we very much look forward to continue listening through this week and as we move forward with our work here in the country. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Claudia. And it was so interesting to learn about how the Argentinian government, and with the support of the UN country team, is working on so many areas using B-side and nutrition, food labeling, education, recycling, decent work, etc. So yeah, very, very interesting. Thank you so much. And how it relates to advancing the Sustainable Development Goals. Really, really very concrete examples, much appreciated. So now we are turning to Rodney, who the government of Canada has been been leader, I think, in this space for some time. You've been working on this way before, I think the UN started working on this more systematically. So what have you learned along the way, and what good advice can you share that might help the UN take its work to the next level? Over to you.
Great, thank you, Ayaka. And so, yeah, really pleased to be here and share the experiences of Canada as UN and UN member sort of organizations are thinking about how to grow this discipline within your organizations. And so maybe what I could do is start with a few context setting comments to help sort of frame, I think the advice and lessons learned that we have gleaned over the years. And so, as Ayaka was saying, we've been in this business for about 6.5, 7 years now. My team, the behavioral science team, is located in what's called the Privy Council Office. This is the Prime Minister's office in Canada, or the department that serves the Prime Minister's office. We're nonpartisan, but we are located in the central parts of government. And so over this 6.5, 7-year period, we've seen a very sort of rapid evolution of our operating model. And so we started in a place where I think a lot of teams normally start, which are small scale, sort of incremental projects, those that you're kind of accustomed to in terms of, classic sort of nudge-based experiments around sort of letter trials, and very much kind of focused on sort of retrospectively trying to fix problems and programs that already exist. And I guess I would argue that those likely have, and this model of working likely has sort of limited scope for growth and kind of scale. So we've had, I would say sort of a fundamental paradigm shift in the way that we operate. And it was COVID and the global pandemic that fundamentally changed the way in which we sort of worked to a place now where we are operating under sort of a multidimensional applied research model, applying behavioral science across sort of policy, program, communication sort of domains. And so, from a pandemic perspective, and Melissa was already kind of talking about this actually, in terms of, the pandemic hit, there was no evidence base for governments to sort of deploy their pandemic responses, which were in large part behaviorally focused. And so in the early days of the pandemic, as you think about mask wearing and physical distancing, moving into border measures, and then ultimately vaccine sort of rollout, so vaccine sort of uptake and deployment. all of these behavioral changes without sort of an evidence base to help inform decision making. And so we built a very sort of robust data infrastructure, actually using a data collection tool that the WHO originally sort of conceived right at the beginning of the pandemic, and we adapted it to Canadian context. You know, about 24 months later, we have, I think, one of the largest sort of behaviorally informed data infrastructures globally. Our data collection infrastructure is across 3 different sort of domains. The first is one that's based on longitudinal data collection. So monitoring the same sort of 2,000 Canadians wave over wave. We've got about 20 waves of data collection sort of underneath our belt that helped inform aspects of our work, like advanced behavioral segmentation of the population to help sort of understand better how to uptake or how to incent sort of uptake of the vaccines. Again, sort of using some of the principles that Melissa was actually talking about in terms of trusted messengers, operational transparency, thinking about the messages that you target to each sort of segment of the population. One level below that, when we saw troubling signs in the data, we would go sort of even deeper, looking at other sort of 2,000 to 3,000 cohorts of Canadians, looking at issues around sort of parental intentions for vaccines. We have one of the largest studies of the unvaccinated sort of population within Canada to understand sort of what was preventing them from uptaking the vaccine. And then finally, some in-field testing work. All of this work was done sort of alongside and embedded with key decision makers sort of along the way. And the work was directly informing cabinet level discussions. This model sort of in its entirety now, in terms of the data collection and sort of this, you know, hub and spoke model that we've built, is now being applied and supporting the government's efforts to combat climate change, looking at sort of issues around sort of misinformation, as well as looking at issues kind of related to all of these sort of key policy considerations around sort of trust in government, trust in democratic institutions, and how can behavioral science sort of help shore that up. So that kind of leads into you know, the key sort of considerations that we have now, that I'd like to share sort of with you and sort of other UN kind of organizations that I think have helped us sort of build this new multidimensional model. So the first is, without a doubt, and this probably won't come as a surprise, is investment. And so we need to ensure that we invest in this discipline sort of at scale and in a sustainable way. And so, you know, if we hold true, I think this idea that sort of public institutions that are looking at developing legislative activities, regulatory sort of interventions, new policies, programs, communications, all towards incenting sort of positive behavior change within a population affecting sort of citizens, then behavioral science is a key tool in understanding that and understanding how to effectively sort of derive impact from that. That means you need to invest sustainably. This is not a side of desk sort of discipline. It has to be sort of core to the work that we do. Number two, this is about sort of investing in an appropriate data infrastructure. And I think sort of classically within public institutions, we normally sort of gather data from other sources that may be adjacent to the policy issue that we are looking at. It may have sort of some inferential sort of value for what we are doing, but behavioral scientists have a very key way of looking at sort of issues. And I think what we need are sort of fit for purpose data collection sort of tools and approaches that can very much be targeted towards the work that you're looking to do. So number three, it's an investment in people and skills. And so without a doubt, it is this idea of finding sort of the right mix of qualitative and quantitative behavioral scientists that can sort of be multi-dimensional sort of in nature, multidisciplinary in nature, and they have to actually be embedded with, I would say, sort of best-in-class policy analysts, communication advisors, and others, working all together to help sort of ensure that the good work of the behavioral scientists can be translated into sort of infrastructures that aren't actually made to take on this work. We've had a lot of sort of interesting kind of lessons learned as we were developing sort of behavioral models that were more predictive of an outcome than traditionally how governments sort of think about things around kind of demographics in terms of age, rank, or age and socioeconomic background and gender. And therefore translating sort of those sort of new insights into, you know, archaic sort of institutions require sort of that strong translative approach to sort of teams. And then finally, this is about sort of governance and good sort of, you know, a good sort of operational model that sort of understands that you need to be directly embedded in organizations with decision makers to help sort of move the work of behavioral science in a way that will actually kind of affect change. And so I kind of mentioned that hub and spoke model. I think for an entity like the UN and all of its sort of organizations that sit under it, it's not dissimilar to, you know, the Canadian government or any sort of national sort of level government, where you've got one sort of core department and then others that span throughout. I think it's a recognition that you can likely not get these skills sort of at scale, and therefore working the hub and spoke model where you have staff sort of embedded in key areas, but coming always back to sort of the central area that is more at the leading edge to help sort of, I think, pioneer methods, but then also sort of translate it out is sort of the best way forward. So with that, maybe I'll just leave it there. I just want to congratulate sort of UAC and others for the amazing work that you're doing at the UN. We're fully supportive of this, and we look forward to collaborating with you and helping you move this discipline forward.
Great. I'm so glad that this is recorded, because you just shared with us a whole trove of very useful tips and advice. Yeah, this is something that we will really need to take very good note of. And I mean, I heard you. It is about investing in people and skills, and I mean, yes, it is. That is the crux of behavioral science, right? I mean, the normative change, the culture change. That's what really matters. And yeah, to scale it, you do need to set that up at all levels. So thank you so much for sharing really valuable lessons learned. We are a little bit running behind, but I do want to do one quick round of rapid fire questions, if you don't mind, panelists. So if you could very briefly tell the audience what you think is the most important factor for behavioral science to be successful at the UN. If you could choose one factor, we'll do it in reverse order. So we go Rodney, Claudia, and Melissa.
Well, I think I characterize most of sort of those factors. Maybe the way I will just sort of round that out is with strong leadership. And I think it is leadership sort of at all levels, both at the most senior level, but then also I think kind of at the working level. And I think if you have the right people in the right place, that's how you can actually scale this up and get the good work done.
Great, thank you. Claudia?
Well, I'm not sure this is the most important one, but I think a key first step for us is awareness. And I think we need to work on that the entire country teams on the ground and the UN system becomes more aware of behavioral sciences as a tool to help us advance with the implementation of the 2030 agenda. As the examples that we've heard today have demonstrated, it's all about looking for simple solutions to complex problems. So awareness would be my first choice.
Great, thank you. Melissa?
I would agree with Claudia, also with Rodney. First, awareness, because for us, our communication strategy is based on behavioral science. And the most important message, I would say, is we have to go local to be effective. We have to be relevant to whose behavior we're trying to change. And that we cannot do that through, a press release from UN headquarters. We really need, and that's why I'm looking to Claudia, we need our country teams to come on board. And through our Verified initiative, we were really able to engage, at the global level, providing a lot of the content, but then the local, only in the local context do you know what is relevant. Can you mobilize what we did in many countries, influencers and even micro influencers across the country, but in communities who would, sign up to be on board, but say, okay, that's your message. Wear more masks or get vaccinated. Stay away. This is how I'm going to communicate it, because this is my this is personality or way of being, or this is how people know me and how people trust me. So we need to mobilize teams of influencers who are willing to team up with me. And I think one of the things that I really learned is everybody wants to partner with the UN. We have a cachet, but we haven't been able to provide people with the kind of cool stuff that they would want to carry. So I think we have a model and we can get better at it, but localization is key. We have the country offices all around the world who are speaking in the languages people understand and have connections to the platforms on which people receive their information. Now we just have to get much better at understanding what is going to motivate them, what is going to persuade them to take the actions we need to make our climate less disastrous, and to get them to take the individual action. But I'm not just talking about individuals, I'm also talking about governments who can really move the needle.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, thank you so much to all the panelists for taking part in this high-level segment, kicking off the Behavioral Science Week this year. And we really learned so much from all of you. So really appreciate your taking the time. So with that, we will now turn briefly to Mary Mclennan, who is a resident behavioral scientist, who is the lead of the UN Behavioral Science Group of the UN Innovation Network, who's been leading on a lot of this really good work. Thank you so much, Mary, and of course, working very closely with us in the Secretary General's office to mainstream behavioral science within the UN system. So Mary, I think you'll be sharing with us some updates on what the Behavioral Science Group has been working on since last year. Yes, over to you.
Great, thank you for the introduction, Ayaka, as well as the opportunity to speak a little bit about our work advancing behavioral science in the UN. So as mentioned, my name is Mary. I work with the Secretary General's office, and I also lead an initiative called the UN Behavioral Science Group. So I'll just start by pausing a little bit here to talk about the group, to give a bit of an overview of how behavioral science has been progressed across the UN from our standpoint. So the group brings together over 800 UN colleagues from over 60 entities in 110 countries. So there's quite a bit of enthusiasm for behavioral science across the UN. And we bring them together to foster behavioral science, provide support as we can. We provide thought leadership as well as light touch technical support on projects, in addition to many other areas of bringing colleagues together. In addition to that, we are also the coordinators of UN Behavioral Science Week. As Ayaka mentioned, we have 18 entities participating, over 20 sessions. So I'd encourage you to check out the events if you haven't seen the agenda already. We have topics ranging from health, climate, peace and security, and many others. So in terms of my remarks today, I'm going to speak about 3 areas. So first, where we've come from with behavioral science in the last few years, then where we currently are, and to conclude with a bit of next steps in terms of where we're going in the near-term future over the coming months and perhaps years. So in terms of where we come from, we've heard remarks already from USG Turk and others regarding Behavioral Science Week last year, and this momentous time for behavioral science in the UN, which was marked by the launch of the UN Secretary General's guidance note on behavioral science. So this echoed some of the remarks again that USG Turk made regarding Secretary General's vision and our common agenda to make the UN more nimble and effective and deliver on the issues of today and tomorrow. Key tools such as behavioral science are necessary to do so. So this guidance note was launched last year, along with a report which showcases the experiences of 25 entities, as well as different enablers to behavioral science in the UN. So if you haven't checked out those 2 documents already, the guidance note and the report, I would encourage you to do so. And then, so over building the momentum of the Secretary General's guidance note, we've seen a lot of new initiatives pop up over the past year, as well as progress in those that have existed previously. Many of these you'll hear about over the course of the week, so I won't go into them right now in my remarks, but I will say that today, I'm excited to announce that we're launching the UN Practitioner's Guide to Getting Started with Behavioral Science, that Ayaka mentioned to you at the beginning of this session. This is a guide that was developed in response to conversations and consultations across UN entities regarding what would be needed to really get started. And that's essentially where we're meeting entities where they are on their behavioral science journey. So this guide was developed by the UN system for the UN system and intends to help colleagues within the UN and beyond to start their journey, as I said. It was based on behavioral science that's been carried out over the last decade, which is essentially since the field began, in academics, in academia, governments, and international organizations. And we've really worked to tailor it to the UN system. So that's the guide. And I'd like to say thank you to colleagues who've engaged with us for the guide. In the UN system, your comments and input is greatly appreciated. As well, we've had colleagues outside the UN system engage with us from governments, academia, as well as international organizations, one of them being the Government of Canada. So thank you, Rodney, and your team for providing input and comments. So this guide is really intended to be an example of the UN family coming together, as well as colleagues outside the UN system. And then finally, just a bit about going forward. So over the next few months, we'll be launching the UN Behavioral Science Fellowship Program, which will bring in technical expertise into the UN system and dedicated projects and moments. And we also are looking to expand the ways in which we engage with governments, academia, international organizations. So I would encourage you to keep your eyes open if you're keen to engage with us in that respect. And then lastly, just a few points of a call to action. First, read the Secretary General's guidance note and the UN Behavioral Science report, as well as this practitioner's guide, which we're launching today. Secondly, join the UN Behavioral Science group. So if you click on the link that I'll put in the chat, you can join the group, which is very quick, takes a few moments. And if you're in the UN, anyone can join. If you're outside the UN, you can join too as an observer. We have colleagues from academia, governments, and international organizations there as well. And then lastly, join the events of UN Behavioral Science Week. Lots there to explore, and I look forward to seeing you throughout the week. Thank you. I'll stop there.
Great, thank you. So once again, many thanks to our eminent panel members. We really appreciated hearing from all of you, and you can see from the chats that it has elicited, I think a lot of what you said really resonated and were appreciated by the audience members. And too bad they couldn't be interactive because of the limited time that we had. But this is just the beginning. In a way, this is kind of a teaser or a trailer. There are many more webinars and activities, as Mary just mentioned, 21 this week. So please participate in them. The agenda of this week was shared by Johanna several chats ago. So if you go back, you'll see the link, but I'm sure Johanna can share again at the very end of the session so that you could easily refer to the program and participate in as many of the session as possible. Claudia also mentioned that there's going to be a more deeper dive on the experiences in Argentina as well, which I think that many colleagues are interested in learning about. So with that, I will conclude this session. So once again, many thanks to the panelists, but really deep appreciation to all of you who took the time to tune in. At one point, we had over 270 audience members. We still have some 235, which is not bad after an hour. This shows the level of interest in this topic. And then I think it bodes really well for this work. So thank you so much, everybody. And well, looking forward to the rest of this week. Bye-bye.
Bye.